Vice President, Research and International. Dr. Jayas supports the university's current areas of established and emerging research strength by ensuring that faculty, students, postdoctoral fellows, and research technicians have access to specialized program training, funding, and services. Dr. Jayas conducts research related to the drying, handling, and storing of grains and oilseeds and the digital image processing for grading and processing operations in the agri-food industry. Collaborating with researchers in several countries has led to a significant impact on the development of efficient grain storage, handling, and drying systems in Canada, China, India, Ukraine, and the United States. Please welcome Dr. Digvar Jayas to say a few words.
Thank you, Michaela. It's a pleasure to be here to provide some brief remarks. The University of Manitoba, as you all know, is committed through signing of many documents to operating its campuses efficiently and is continuing to work to be more sustainable in all its operations. The Office of Sustainability is a champion for our sustainability efforts on all campuses, although we are typically C of 2, but as you know, we have field stations distributed throughout the province. So in all of our on all of our campuses, they work with the stakeholders to make improvements, and they also engage the community in many ways, such as today's research panel discussion. Their office coordinates, tracks, and reports on the university's progress related to the issues and commitment we have made in our sustainability strategy. That strategy is aligned with the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Dr. Fahrenhorst will tell you a bit about our involvement and leadership in relation to the SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. I would like to end by thanking Qiuyan Yuan and her team in the Sustainability Office for their leadership on behalf of the university campus community. I would also like to thank today's panelists for their dedication to seeking answers to complex environmental issues through research and discovery. Miigwech, merci, thank you.
Thank you so much, and we're so happy you could join us today. Next, I would like to introduce the United Nations Academic Impact Hub for Sustainable Development Goal 6 Working Group Co-Chair, Associate Dean Research, and Professor with the Department of Soil Science in the Faculty of Agricultural and Food Sciences, Dr. Anna-Micah Fahrenhorst. Dr. Fahrenhorst's natural science research focuses on the fate and distribution of current use pesticides in soil and water, and particularly on chemical absorption by matrices such as soil, sediments, plants, humic substances, microplastics, and biochars. Dr. Fahrenhorst's natural and social science research focuses on drinking water quality in First Nations reserves, including monitoring for bacteria and antibiotic-resistant genes in tap water, and conducting surveys to better understand the impact of poor drinking water quality on First Nations. Please welcome Dr. Anna-Micah Fahrenhorst to say a few words. Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Fahrenhorst. We actually can't hear you. No, it's very, very faint.
It may be the headphones. If you plug in, you might.
Yeah, it seems like, yeah.
Please.
No, don't think I can. Oh, yeah, just say one more thing.
Is this better?
Yes, now I can hear you. Perfect.
Yeah, that's strange.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. They're normally working fine. So I just want to thank you, Michaela, for allowing me to speak and tell people a little bit more about our academic impact initiative. Just a correction, as of July 1st, I'm actually Associate Vice President of Research, so I've joined Dr. Jayas in his team. I'm very happy to be here today, and I think this is a great initiative that the Office of Sustainability is spearheading. And as Dr. Jay has mentioned, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the United Nations Academic Impact Initiative, or UNA, as it is abbreviated. So specifically, the University of Manitoba is the UNI hub for the Strategic Development Goal 6, Clean Water and Sanitation. And it's a true honor and a test to our excellence in researching clean water and sanitation. Because in addition to the University of Manitoba, there's only one other education institution in North America who's also a UNI hub. And this is New York Medical College, who is leading the Strategic Development Goals number 3, which stands for Good Health and Well-Being. So in 2020, we formed the University of Manitoba UNI SDG 6 working group, and the Office of Sustainability is part of this working group. Our working group brings together members at the University of Manitoba to foster knowledge sharing and collaboration in the area of clean water and sanitation. Currently, we have 22 members, including some of the researchers that might be on call today. And if you like to join us, please feel free to send me an email. And we tend to meet monthly. Including today. We were recently renewed for another 3-year term by the United Nations, so until 2024. So this is a really good time to join our working group. We are particularly interested in advancing research, analysis, and policies for ensuring clean water and sanitation for all, and particularly advocate for clean running drinking water in all Indigenous communities in Manitoba and indeed across Canada. So this panel discussion today is co-hosted by the working group, and some of our members are indeed presenters today. So I'm looking forward to this session and hearing from everyone about their ongoing research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today. Next, I would like to start introducing our panelists today. So first up, we have Dr. Hanson. His research focuses on the response of freshwater organisms to various types of stressors, with a special emphasis on aquatic plants and invertebrates. The interactions between organisms and the way in which these can influence the stress response are studied at the laboratory and field level. This helps in our understanding and ability to predict the risk an exposure to a toxin or change in water quality can provoke at the ecosystem level. Next, we have Dr. Yuan, whose interests cover a variety of environmental engineering topics, with the primary research area being nutrient removal and recovery. Dr. Yuan is particularly interested in the technological implementation of biological phosphorus removal and chemical phosphorus recovery. Dr. Yuan is also interested in leachate treatment, biomass fermentation, and anaerobic digestion. Next up, we have Tanvir Hasneen, a PhD student in the environmental engineering program at the University of Manitoba. Hasneen's research interests include microplastics, landfill leachate treatment, wastewater treatment, solid waste management, and sustainable development. And next we have Dr. Levin, whose research is focused on biotechnologies for sustainability, such as biofuels, biodegradable polymers, and microbial production of antioxidants. Dr. Levin's research is multidisciplinary and integrates microbiology, biotechnology, and genome sciences with bioprocess and biosystems engineering. And next on our panel, we have Dr. Ackerman, whose research is in relation to phosphorus cycling, eutrophic water systems, nutrient capture, anaerobic digestion, soil science, and finding industrial uses for recycled glass and plastic. He's currently working on methods of plastic recycling to reduce contamination. Next, we have Qidong Zhang, who is a PhD student with the Department of Environment and Geography at the University of Manitoba. Zhang's research focuses on marine pollution, including energy exploitation offset and microplastics. Sang is specifically looking into Arctic marine microplastics and the relation to climate change and the development of biosurfactant-based dispersants and associated technologies for offshore oil spill control. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. I really appreciate taking time out of your busy schedules to help build awareness around Plastic-Free July today. I'm going to start off our panel discussion by asking questions to each of you. So we're going to start off with the first question being for Dr. Hanson. Plastic pollution is a complex and persistent issue, but if you were to choose one crucial aspect you've learned through your research, what does the community need to know?
Well, that's quite the way to start this off. I would say it's important to recognize that we all play a role in this. A lot of contamination at times, we think of other people doing it. We think of it as being someone else's problem to address. But ultimately, plastic pollution is something we are all every day actively being a part of, right? This is not something that is someone else to work towards. It's not someone else's, we can't look and point fingers. It's each and every one of us. We all use plastic in our lives. We all dispose of plastics in various ways. We are all, through our use of plastics, putting them out in the environment. So I think that's right off the bat, is to recognize that the solution to this isn't for someone else to do something, but as a collective, we need to do something. It's not as simple as turning off a pipe or switching from one chemical to another, or trying to change sort of a formulation that we use in industry or something. We've drawn these things into every facet of our lives. We rely on them, whether we're conscious of it or not. And so ultimately, the problem and both the solution is us. And so we need to work together and try and figure out what that is. So yeah, that would be my answer right off the bat. Thanks for that, by the way.
Excellent. Great response, Dr. Hanson, and thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to pose the same question to Dr. Levin as well to you.
Well, I'm not sure I can add much more to that, other than that when I was younger, there was when the newspapers used to have the comics section, there was something called Little Abner, and probably many of you won't remember because you're too young, but one of the catchphrases was that we have met the enemy and he is us. And I think that just basically captures what Dr. Hanson is saying, is that we are the problem. The consumer society and our tendency to consume and then discard whenever it's convenient and use the environment as a dumping ground without thinking of the consequences, that is coming back to bite us. And we need to, it's a very complex problem, has many, many facets to it. There's no one solution. I mean, we can develop technological fixes, which is what we work on and many other people are working on around the world. But in the end, it's the consumer and the companies, basically the manufacturers, have to work together to develop formulations of biodegradable, not just biodegradable, but bioassimilatable polymers for materials, so that they return to the earth and enter the carbon that's used to make them returns to the carbon cycle. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much, Dr. Levin. Did any of the other panelists want to comment or answer that question? If no, then we're going to move on to our next question for Dr. Ackerman. What are the impacts of plastic pollution on human health, specifically micro and nanoplastics?
You can hear me now? Am I coming through? Okay, good.
Yeah, you are.
This is a great question, and it is a new science. It's just beginning, so there's not a lot known about it. I haven't done any research myself, but I've done pretty extensive literature reviews on microplastics, and you can't really say it is it's not, it shouldn't actually be qualified as a poison, because it's more like, because there's a huge part that is unknown, and as a plastic gets smaller and smaller, it becomes less of an obstruction and more of a sort of a medium. Some people believe that, or they're afraid that it can be an agent to bring large organic toxins into the body, where because of through sorption and that sort of thing, and that will be stripped off in your body. So they'll act as a way to toxify an organism. But there's actually not a lot of good data on that from the environment. You can create a situation like that in the lab, but there's not a lot of data showing that that will happen. But basically, the way to think about it is the blockage in the digestive tract is one of the main routes. Like a tire will be a blockage for a whale, but it won't be for us. Whereas for us, it will be a bottle cap. And as you get down to smaller and smaller size of piece of plastic, then it becomes a blockage for a worm. As you get to a couple microns, then when you get to an area of nanoplastics, that is an area that is very much unknown, because at about 300 nanometers, it can cross a cell membrane and then enter a cell. And there's not really good data on how prevalent that is. But by and large, the overall story that I can see, we should really cut down the use of plastics, because even though that in natural environments, the concentration of plastic isn't nearly the level that you find effects in the lab, the trajectory that we're on to is only to increase the amount of plastic in our environment and the degradation and the prevalence of nano and microplastics. So we should not wait until there is a problem, because by the time there is a problem, there'll be no alternative, because it's basically it's not really a cleanable item. You can't. They're so small that they can't be plucked out of with a filter. So there, that's my take. Maybe Mark, you have something to add to that, because you've worked more extensively with microplastic.
Did you want me to comment, Michaela, or did you have someone else you were?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I will open that up to if you would like to comment on that.
So first off, I'm not a human health person. I always throwing that caveat out. So just recognize I'm more of a non-person in terms of effects and responses. So I think what Joe sort of summarized there is pretty much on the ball. There's a lot of unknowns. I personally am not overly concerned about the impacts on human health, because it's one of these things that plastics aren't something that suddenly got released yesterday and we're trying to figure it out. The microplastics have been around for a very long time. We just never really paid attention to them. And so in terms of effects on human health and things like that, we probably would have seen, if they were having some sort of large scale effects or certainly measurable effects from background, we probably would have picked those up by now. There would have been some signals. But that said, there's no reason why we sort of, don't take a little bit sort of a cautious approach and be vigilant about these things, right? There's always lots of unknowns. There's things that could be occurring in the future. And the plastics, I mean, the complexity of that is because there's so many different types, so many different forms, that, there's always the potential for some sort of type that could be problematic. But certainly from you think about us, we ingest things, we pass it out. We're designed to sort of take in solids and break them down and excrete them. And so we do the same thing with microplastics. Microplastics in, microplastics out. as Joe alluded to, it's that sort of that blockage. Certainly with smaller organisms may be an issue, right? If you get smaller and smaller and your intestinal tract becomes narrower and narrower, suddenly, 5 millimeters across becomes, the whole scope of you. And so that may be an issue there for those types of organisms, but that's more of an ecological thing as to human health. Yeah, so that's my quick 2 cents.
Excellent, thank you. And Tanver, with your specialized area of research, I would like to pose the same question to you. What are the impacts of plastic pollution on human health, specifically micro and nanoplastics?
Thank you. Actually, I also want to add something else with Dr. Mark Hanson and also Dr. Joe. First of all, I just want to explain what is microplastic. Microplastic, actually, it is something, it is very small in size, less than 5 millimeter in diameter, like from 1 to 5 millimeter in diameter. So like if you say that human eye, they can identify particles only within 40 micrometers. So like most of the microplastics, we cannot see in naked eyes. And there are 2 different sources of these microplastics, like primary and the secondary. Some of the microplastics, this comes directly through different industries. For example, if I say from the beauty product, like different microbeads they are using for facial purposes. So how it comes to the water body, like when we do the facial, it comes to the water body and go to the wastewater treatment plant. So my research is with this thing, like how this microplastics is affecting in the wastewater treatment process, and also how we can do the treatment of this microplastic from the wastewater treatment plant. So basically what I wanted to say like here is this microplastic, it is going through the wastewater treatment plant because this is not treating properly because of its very small size. And at the end, it is going to the ocean and also in different surface water bodies. So when it goes to the surface water bodies, it comes to our human body through the food chain. I mean, the fish, they are consuming these microplastics, and also there are very small microorganisms, aquatic microorganisms in the water bodies, like if you say about the phytoplankton or zooplankton, they are taking this microplastic and they are thinking that it is their food, but actually it is plastic. And they are taking these microplastics, and these microplastics, this zooplankton, it is also consumed by the fish. And at the end of the day, what is happening? We are taking their fish and we are indirectly consuming these microplastics, and it is entering into our bodies. So of course there are some impacts, like though my concern is not about the direct health impacts, but according to the literature, what I studied before, that I found that it has some impacts. And also from the recent news, I found that there are some microplastic impact on the human placenta. They found microplastic in the human placenta as well, and also it creates coming to the body through inhalation and ingestion. So it's very carcinogenic because most of the microplastics, these are combination of different polymers which are non-biodegradable, and these are really harmful for the health. So, and also if we see to the ocean, like there are there are some big plastic particles, like from the bottles, also fishing gears. These are also degraded. These are big plastic particles, but they are degraded mechanically, like through UV radiation, and also you can say with the wave of the ocean, these are degraded and they are becoming as microplastics. And again, what I wanted to say, like it is coming to the human body through the food chain. So of course it's an emerging issues, and according to the United Nations Environmental Protection, this is one of the 10 emerging environmental problems worldwide. So I think we should act locally, but think globally. Thus we can reduce the plastic pollution from the local level, and also by changing our behavior. So this is important, like how we are acting and how we are managing these plastics in our regular life. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And for Keidong Sang, since you are specifically looking at Arctic marine microplastics, was there anything else that you wanted to share with the UM community that they need to know?
Yes, thanks first. I totally agree with the previous speaker's opinions. The plastic litters have been like worldwide, like even like in a remote area like Arctic, there have been found microplastics, especially in the sea ice. The sea ice can scavenge and concentrate the microplastics, and with the transportation and the movement of the sea ice, it can be transported to most of the place like by the ocean currents. So basically, as we know, the recent COVID-19 pandemic situation, there have been a large source of microplastics litters, like due to our use, the masks, the single-use masks and gowns, or even gloves. There have been many news reporting that the plastic waste has been found in the ocean. And if they were exposed to the environment, the weathering process can make them more into much smaller sizes. And the weather microplastics can also be a carrier of the chemical contaminants. So basically, it's very important for everyone to reduce use or even recycle them. Even we still need to use microplastics. We need to do it in a right way to recycle them, not being like randomly disposed. Yeah, that's pretty much from my opinion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. So now we'll go back to Dr. Mark Hanson. Can you speak more about the effects of plastic debris in the environment and on wildlife?
Yeah, sure. I can sort of summarize a little bit. So in the past, I would say 5 years or so, there's obviously been an uptick in the investigations into the effects of microplastics and a little bit into nanoplastics. As has been alluded to earlier, the challenge, of course, is that it's when you talk about microplastics, they're not a monolith, right? It's not like you're talking about a single chemical, or if you talk about, say, some metals, at least there's only so many forms the metal can take, that sort of thing. Microplastics, it's a fairly nebulous type of material, right? It's sort of defined more by size than anything else. So you can have large pieces of plastic that eventually break down, and degrade through either physical action or other processes into smaller and smaller pieces. And that's you sort of come that way. You can have things that were designed to be under that 5 millimeter size for whatever their application was. The classic example being sort of micro beads within cosmetics and cleaning products that have now sort of, at least in Canada, sort of are no longer approved. And so the challenge, of course, when trying to say, do microplastics cause an impact, whether humans or say aquatic organisms or shoal organisms, that there's that's, well, what microplastic are we talking about? And then, of course, the next challenge, of course, is what organism are we talking about? I always say human health risk assessment is easy, right? We know about people, we know what they eat, we know where they go around and do things. But when we get into the environment, right, there's all sorts of organisms for which we don't know anything about, or let alone what they feed on, how much they feed on, their physiology, that sort of thing. So it becomes a challenge to sort of try and predict and understand. For the most part, they tend to be, and again, the question is, are you talking about new plastics? Are you talking about older plastics that have weathered? In the past, we think back a little bit, and not that far in time, we had that switch, right? We all got concerned about some of the plasticizers within the plastics, and we all switched to BPA-free plastics to get away from that within our water bottles. That was a huge thing, or other products. And so the concern wasn't the plastic; it was compounds within the plastics, and obviously, that could be potentially what, if we do see an effect, is that what's driving the response we see, compounds within the plastics, not necessarily the plastics themselves. You know, and how old are the plastics? Are those compounds now just leached out into water and broken down? So it's sort of it's a mixed bag, right? Ultimately, sort of depends on the organism, depends what you're looking at. A lot of tests sort of find that, you know, depending on the organism, right, that if they have a, you know, if that compound is not going to, say, be large enough to cause blockages or, you know, sort of clog up filtering apparatus or things like that, you tend to see particles in, particles out, right? So in that respect, you're not necessarily looking at something where an organism gets exposed to a microplastic and keels over and dies. You're not sort of seeing that chemical toxicity where, you know, a chemical gets taken up, it goes to a particular mode or site of action, whether it's, you know, genetic or enzymatic or whatever, shuts down a process and the organism begins to fail. It's more of a physical stressor, right? It's an object. And so you tend to think of the organisms that are most vulnerable to this would be the organisms that tend to feed through these, you know, filter feeders, things that move through systems and potentially take them up. And so the evidence there is sort of a little bit hit and miss, as I alluded to earlier. It depends on how much is exposed, and ultimately, you know, all things can be toxic, right? You can increase the concentrations to the point where, you know, you will see an effect. But I think what we should focus on is more the idea that we don't want to get to levels where there's going to be problems, where organisms truly are impaired. We're aware of the situation. We obviously, and the thing about microplastics is they don't go away very quickly, right? This is sort of a signal of the Anthropocene, right? You know, as we get sediments forming, 100 million years from now, when aliens arrive and they start to, you know, investigate the planet, they're going to find this little interesting layer, perhaps. And so the idea is to avoid causing effects. We know these things are out there. There's uncertainty around them. There's a potential for them to do things if concentrations get high enough or the situation is right. So the idea is to avoid those scenarios altogether, right? Whether it's aquatic, whether it's terrestrial. Yeah. So yeah, that's my 5 cents, I'd say. So there you go.
Thank you, Dr. Hanson, for providing a bit more insight on that. Did any of the other panelists want to comment or add anything to that? Okay, so I'm going to move to the next question for Dr. Ackerman. If you were to give advice to a UM student, staff, or faculty member trying to go plastic-free for a month, what would it be?
You missed my joke. I said like plastic-free August. Yeah, and actually my recommendation is to go plastic-free for the next year. Like jump in, make a difference. Well, okay, here's my advice. Rather than shun plastic, try to not change your behavior except by keep holding on to your plastic. So all the plastic that runs through your life that you normally dispose of and never have to think about again, keep it, wash it, dry it, and keep it. Put it in some corner of the kitchen, and when the pile gets pretty big, organize it. Learn about the kinds of plastic to use, like figure out what those little numbers on the little dumb recycling infinity recycling thing mean, and what are the qualities of each of those kinds of plastic. How, like, plastic is, the more you learn about plastic, the more you'll see how we are dependent on it. And it's sort of like, by knowing your enemy, you can then defeat it. So I've been doing this for almost a year, not throwing away anything. And my God, it's like I have to find other places to store my washed and dried plastic film, which is all, you know, number 4, and, you know, some of the nasty stuff is number 3. That's basically my advice, is don't try and rid it from your life, but rid it from your life in a very methodical, planned way, so that you see what role it plays in your life and figure out ways to live without it by first accepting that it's a really key part of. If you look at what's around us, and this comes into microplastic discussion, we are surrounded by plastic. You know, the table that you have in front of you that your laptop is on, the chair that you're sitting on, the fiber that it's made out of, quite possibly your clothing, your shoes, the paint on your wall, the flooring, the siding. Like, we live in plastic, and it's not a good idea. So anyways, that's my advice is get familiar with where you live.
Thank you, Dr. Ackerman, and what a great learning opportunity for people to start collecting and understanding what plastic is in their life and how to sort of alter it from that standpoint. Did any of the other panelists want to offer any advice to University of Manitoba students, staff, and faculty that are on this call today? No, I think we have time for one more question before I open it up to the audience. This is going to be for Dr. Levin. What is your position on bioplastics, especially when considering their life cycle impacts?
Well, we have to be careful when we talk about bioplastics. If you think about a quadrant, there's actually 4 different kinds of polymers that materials are made out of. There are polymers made from petroleum that are recalcitrant to degradation. That's, the polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene, things that last in the environment for a very long time. And they're not biodegradable. But then there are some petroleum polymers, or polymers derived from petroleum, that are polyesters and that putatively are biodegradable. So polyethylene succinate, polybutylene succinate, polycaprolactone, things like that. Then there are polymers derived from natural resources, natural materials, that are not biodegradable. So there's biopolyethylene and biopolypropylene. They're made from renewable sources, but they're not biodegradable. So they're kind of a biopolymer, but they're not biodegradable. And then there are polymers made from bioresources, the renewable resources that are fully biodegradable and bioassimilatable. So there's no one term that covers all of these things, and each of these different kinds of polymers have different thermal and physical properties which make them useful to us, why we find them indispensable why our entire civilization is more or less built on them, and why, as Dr. Ackerman says, we are living within plastic. So we have to think about, if we're going to displace or replace non-degradable or highly recalcitrant polymers like polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene with those that are fully biodegradable, and not just biodegradable, but bioassimilatable, that can return to the carbon cycle, we have to have polymers that have the same physical and thermal, or at least similar physical and thermal properties to the ones that we're trying to displace, to the recalcitrant ones, the non-degradable ones. And that's a challenge, because of those polymers that are fully biodegradable, bioassimilatable, and from renewable sources, they don't necessarily have the same physical thermal properties as the ones that we love to use, polyethylene, polypropylene. So we have to rethink about our use of materials. If we want to make things more, like use materials that are more fully biodegradable and recyclable, we have to find different solutions to our material problems. If maybe and before we had plastic, people used to carry their groceries or their vegetables in different kinds of containers. Then plastic containers, plastic bags came along, and people forgot about those traditional forms of containers. Well, maybe we have to change our thinking and go back to those kinds of things. Or we have to, we're going to rely on a science solution. We have to find polymers that are similar enough to what we use so that people will buy them. Because the problem is that people like to, we're creatures of habit. We like to buy what we use. We like to use what we normally use, what we used in the past, and we want it to be low cost. And so that's the other challenge, is that the cost of producing the petroplastics is so low that any biosolution, any biodegradable, biosimilatable material made from natural and reusable or natural sources is going to cost a lot more. And so we have to find a way to incentivize people to buy the biosimilatable polymers and disincentivize them from buying the petroleum polymers. But and that's a public debate. That's a policy issue, a government policy issue. That plays into the whole complexity of the plastic pollution problem, because most of these petroplastics are manufactured by the oil and gas industry in the United States or in Europe, and we can't ban them because we have free trade agreements. So it's very, very complicated. And so I believe that we have to find a way to shift our consumer attitudes, our consumer behavior towards the recyclable, biodegradable, biosimilatable polymers or materials made from those things, and away from the petroplastics. But it's not easy. It's going to be a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Levin. I didn't even realize the various forms associated with the term bioplastics, so that was very insightful. Thank you for highlighting that today. Could I open this up to the audience now to ask some questions for the panelists? You can either put them in the chat, or you can turn your video on and unmute yourself. If you're going to put them in the chat, I'll just read them out to the panelists. If there's a specific person that you're directing it to, please highlight that in the chat as well too. Okay, so first question, why doesn't the UM take more responsibility about the vendors allowed on campus? Starbucks, Tim Hortons, the food vendors, vending machines, even the UM bookstore all sell many hundreds of single plastics each day. If the UM doesn't sell it, consumers can't buy it. Would anyone like to tackle that question?
Definitely outside my pay grade. Yeah.
Well, I'll jump in because, and this goes to the entire problem with the consumer society. We live in a free society. People feel they have the right to buy whatever they want, where they want, when they want. And if you start regulating and limiting the availability of products, people will get upset. They'll get angry, and vendors will lose customers. So what it comes down to is money. That's why. But the university could, well, I don't know what the relationship is between the bookstore and the university. The bookstore is not owned by the university, I don't think. The bookstore, I think, leases space. I mean, it's a company within the university, I think. I'm not sure how it works, but if the bookstore was a department within the university, then the university could make those kinds of executive decisions and say, okay, we're just not going to buy materials that are made from these or that have this kind of packaging, and that sends a message to the manufacturers that, okay, we'll sell your product, but not if it's packaged in this way. Otherwise, you have to go to the board of that company and lobby them to make those changes, and that's the problem, because the bottom line is money, right? All moral, ethical, and environmental decisions are subjugated to people's right to make money. So that's the society we live in. Thank you.
Did any of the other panelists have anything they would like to add to that?
I could say that I believe the university could have, they could put some pressure on the coffee cup issue, the disposable coffee cup issue, which are not recyclable. They could just say, well, you have to give a discount for people who bring their own cup. Must. That would be a really simple policy thing. So if you want to maintain your lease, you have to do that. And I imagine that might reduce coffee disposable cup by 10%, or who knows, maybe more. But I think the university has more leeway than they let on.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. This is not these companies aren't coming in and pulling a wool over the institution's eyes. Like, everyone knows what they're doing and what their benefits are, and the institution has some leverage here, right? You've got a captive audience at the U of M campus, right? You can't simply walk across, and be somewhere else, right? It's a little bit more involved than that. So, as a university community, if that's what people want, and then the people in charge of making those agreements and overseeing those, the restaurants and the purchasing, that's where you'll start to be able to make a change, like anywhere else.
Thank you, everyone, for your input on that question. We do have a live question now, so I'm going to pass it off to William Dowie to ask his question.
Hey, everybody! I really appreciate the panel today. I learned a few things, not only as a consultant, but I'm here as a member of the Sustainability Committee representing the grad students. So the fact that we're still having this kind of conversation, and I appreciated the allusions to consumer behavior and a little bit of public policy, but what role does this type of panel have to transpose and maybe even translate into a language of public awareness and political will? Because we definitely have to do some sort of regulation, and we're starting to touch upon procurement policy in the last conversation. So, again, that's the classic preaching to the choir. We're all here, the 23 of us. But how do we translate your expertise and your insights scientifically and socially into the real world?
What an excellent question and commentary. Good on you. Who is it? William? We have no mandate. We have no directive of how do we take our Office of Sustainability through this together and pull these people together. And I agree with you completely. We actually have, sort of a nice little team that could affect some policy change. There. That doesn't really answer your question, but.
Well, I'll jump in again. I mean, I guess it's like any environmental or consumer issue that needs where a change in policy is required, and you have to mobilize people. You have to get people's opinion on a side, and people then have to pressure their elected representatives, and the companies, the manufacturers pressure the members of the board. We had Pollution Probe was an environmental advocacy organization when I was a student way back in dinosaur days, and they were very effective. It took a long time. Most people, they weren't mainstream. They were considered radical, and foamy loudmouth radical kids who don't know anything about the real world. But in the end, they were able to affect a lot of changes by mobilizing people's opinions. And today we accept those as normal and standard. So, we have to, if we really want to make these kinds of changes, we have to get people behind the movement or on board with the movement and get people to be vocal. That's all. Write letters to your elected representatives. Social media. I mean, I'm too old for social media, but I know that it's very effective. And circulating ideas and information. So, and we pass the torch to the younger generation, right? So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
One thing I want to add, from the Office of Sustainability, what we can do, like in this Plastic Free July month, or maybe in the next year, maybe in the other months. So what we can do, we can arrange a brand audit on campus, like for single-use plastic, so that we can easily identify who is the most polluters on campus, like for single-use plastics, and definitely it will go through like some of the prominent company, probably Starbucks or could be Tim Horton. So it is an extra pressure for them. Like if we can identify and the number of participants, they can show that your brand is more responsible for this. So that could be a big pressure for them. Like maybe they will think twice at least. And also one thing we can do, like Office of Sustainability from University of Manitoba, they can be the member of Break Free from Plastic. Actually, Break Free from Plastic is a global movement for plastic pollution. So there are thousands of organizations. They are working together only for plastic pollution. So like if Office of Sustainability, they can be the part of this global movement, I think it will be a great initiative. And we can reduce some source of plastic pollution from Canada. And yesterday when I was checking, I found that like Environmental Defense Canada, they are the member of this Break Free from Plastic. So we also can be the member of that global movement, and we can work together and we can reduce the pressure and create a pressure for the most polluters who are making the plastic pollution. This is my suggestion, like maybe Office of Sustainability, they can think about this.
Okay, and I'll add to that. I think, thank you. That's a really good point. And I think what we could add to that is not only to lobby the organizations, the companies on campus that are contributing the most to single-use plastic use, or to coffee cups that are not recyclable, is to offer them, find out what products are available from around the world that are recyclable, that are biodegradable, and offer them, or suggest to them, say, well, rather than use these cups made with this material that are not recyclable or not biodegradable, what about these companies? They sell these kinds of things which are supposedly biodegradable or recyclable. So give them the option, or give them some options to think about, that rather than just say, oh, stop doing this. I would say always offer a positive solution rather than just be negative. That would be very helpful.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Excellent. Did anyone else want to add to that from the panel? And I'll just wait a couple seconds to see if anyone from the audience wanted to ask any additional questions. You can put it in the chat or unmute yourself at this time.
I have one question. This is for Joe, actually. Your collection of plastic, what's the one item that you see pops up the most within that?
Oh,
the reoccurring one.
Plastic film.
Plastic film.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Partly because it's such a headache. Plastic tends to be a lipophilic, so it gets greasy, and you have to have a really clean water. Lots of soap in it to wash it, so I tend to stack them up, and so my counter is always freaking full of bits of plastic film. And it does make, I made a little plastic bag dryer, and so I've got all the plastic bags I could ever want, and still piles and piles and piles of film.
Joe?
Yeah.
Sorry. So, Joe, what is the most abundant polymer type amongst your collection?
Oh, that's polyethylene. So film is number 4, which is linear, low density polyethylene.
Well, sometimes if they have packaging, like when boxes are wrapped in plastic, it's more like cellophane kind of thing, or I'm not sure if that's polyethylene, but I guess, I mean, if you go to Best Buy or any kind of big box consumer store, everything is always wrapped in plastic wrap.
Right.
It's not necessarily polyethylene, but anyway.
That's true. That's true. But you see, like Saran wrap used to be PVC, and it had so many plasticizers in it in order to give it that cling and that stretch. That's what people, they found like, oh, somebody put it in the microwave and all that stuff ended up in their food. And so then they basically banned it for consumers. So now that's polyethylene, and that's why it doesn't cling as good. But commercially, you can still use PVC Saran wrap. And so that's why at meat counters, it's, like everything commercially is all, and restaurants and all that.
Okay. Well, hang on to those pieces of plastic because we're going to find bugs that eat them. So.
All right. Good to know. I will hold on to them. I don't quite have a year's worth, but I'm getting tired of it. But it does cut down on accumulation, because basically I feel married to stuff that I bring home. And it's like, oh shit, I gotta like wash this, and like those damn clamshells, completely useless and take up a lot of space.
Yeah, you're gonna have to have a storage locker in your house for the plastic room until it fills up and spills out into the rest of the house. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
So I do want to be conscious of everyone's time, and it's 1:02 right now, but we do have a comment and a question left. Panelists, would you be okay to take a couple more? Yeah, excellent. Ramanathan, did you want to unmute?
Yeah, this is Ranjan from the Department of Biosystems Engineering. I was traveling through other countries, especially in India. I noticed they used cups made of leaves that are embossed in place of, for a reusable or biodegradable material instead of plastics. Like in restaurants and hotels, they gave food in these cups made of leaves, actually. They're embossed leaves with some kind of wax coating. But I had never seen that here in Canada. Is something that we should be promoting?
Yeah, and I think the idea that there's a one solution or that will replace what we do now, I think the idea is that there's probably different solutions in different places for different applications, right? So whatever leaves they were probably using were probably more local, I suspect. Yeah. And so for Canada to, I don't know, Winnipeg in the winter, good luck finding a leaf. And so otherwise you're going to have to be bringing in leaves from somewhere, and guess what you're using, your, fuel resources and all sorts of stuff. And then you have the potential, well, if you're bringing a whole bunch of biological material leaves from another part of the world, well, you get a lot of potential hitchhikers that come along, and then you've got all these other issues. And so I think the idea is that, in different places are probably going to have different options and different types of solutions. And, culture and nature and ecosystems will play a role in that. And and I'm always, anytime you talk about moving biological material from one part of the world to another, I get leery, because usually that's you're bringing in organisms or other things that, once, at least microplastics over time will degrade and disappear. But once you introduce an insect to an ecosystem, good luck, or a virus or a bacteria, it's there for a long, long time. And if you think you can't pull microplastics out, well, you definitely can't pull them out. So.
Well, I'll just add to that. In fact, there is work going on at the University of Manitoba on developing materials for plates and bowls and cups that are made from agricultural residues here in Manitoba. So Joe, Dr. Ackerman, has been working on making bowls and plates out of oat hulls, compressed oat hulls, I think. And in my lab, we're making multi-layered thin films with biodegradable, bioassimilatable polymers for making food packaging materials. wrapping food up. And there's other polymers that we're working with that could be ultimately used to make biodegradable straws, or at least the problem with the problem with Starbucks cups is they're made from cellulose, but they have a polyethylene liner, right? So if we can replace the liner with a biodegradable, bioassimilatable polymer that does the same thing, which is like a moisture barrier and thermal barrier, then maybe Starbucks cups and other of those kinds of fast food drink containers will become recyclable or at least biodegradable and can go to the landfill. So there are people working on these kinds of things, and these are, like you say, thinking local solutions to local problems, but thinking globally. And I think that's hopefully where we will find the solutions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. I will be conscious of the time because we're a little bit over, but and I'm sorry that we didn't get to address everyone's questions and comments. But can I say that if anyone was interested in learning more, would they be able to reach out to either of you on the panel? Excellent. So feel free to reach out to the panelists if you do have any other questions that you would like to ask. I just wanted to say thank you to our panelists for joining us today. It's been a very insightful conversation and discussion around Plastic Free July. And thank you to all of the guests for joining and for your great questions and comments that you brought today. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. Yeah. Bye now. Thank you.
Bye.